Now that's the type of Kansas State football I want to see.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back, my everydayers. We are reacting to Kansas State getting the win, a big win over TCU, 41-28. Most importantly, moving back to 500 in Big 12 play. The season's not over. They stay alive. TCU had the opportunity in this one based on, the type of talent that TCU comes in, bringing in. I thought Sonny Dykes might want to be revenge in this one based off how he performed last week against Colorado. He wanted to maybe continue that narrative, maybe throw some dirt on the Wildcats and completely end their season. But that will have to wait for another game. Kansas State continues on 2-2 in Big 12 play, 3-4 on the season. And now when you start to look at the Big 12 standings, you kind of think, okay, there is a slightly small, don't get me wrong, slightly small possibility that you can make this thing work. Things are starting to fall into pieces, fall into place. And we're going to talk about that on this show today. Excuse me if I sound a little raspy, voice is a little off today. The weather's changing. So I'm sure that's what's going to happen. It sounds like I need a bye week as well, but have no fear. We'll be bringing you Locked On Kansas State coverage every single day, your team every day through the bye week. So hit that subscribe button today. We're going to talk 41-28 on this one, and let's start right off the bat. The defense was the main reason. I made a joke on social media and said, I found the cure for Matt Wells' play calling issues to make us not have to worry about Matt Wells. And I actually think Matt Wells did pretty good today. We'll talk about it in a minute. But I said, just have the defense score the points. And that's exactly what they did. The defense committed a bunch of turnovers. They got 3 turnovers in this one, and it was just outstanding. 2 interceptions. They had 1 fumble pickup, and Desmond Purnell was absolutely insane. Wesley Fair was insane as well, and they scored on 2 defensive touchdowns, 1 by each of them. Desmond Purnell almost scored on another one. He almost had a 3rd interception. Very excited to see what the PFF scores show up when it comes to that. Josh Hoover on the TCU side, we mentioned coming into the week, other than Sawyer Robertson of Baylor, heading into this game so far this season was probably the second best quarterback in the Big 12. He easily had his worst game of the season against Kansas State. So props to Joe Klanderman, props to this defensive crew to really put some pressure on this guy. Towards the end of the game, Josh Hoover just looked like a guy that did not belong in the Big 12 at all, let alone one of the top quarterbacks in this league. There was multiple drives towards the end where he just was throwing ducks out there. The second interception by Purnell was just one that was landed right in his breadbasket. I mean, it was a perfect interception for him. And, overthrows and tip passes are something that Kansas State thrives on. And we got to finally see that this season for the first time, some defensive scoring for Kansas State. It's a good feeling that they finally got this type of an advantage. And if you want to say luck go in your direction because you get the tip passes and you get the defense standing on their head, although there were some injuries in this game and heading into this game, you thought, okay, maybe they're not going to be able to stand up with this type of offense. And Josh Hoover, Eric McAllister, there's a couple of other really good players on TCU that just weren't utilized properly. And I'm sure that on the other side of this, if you go listen to Locked On Horned Frogs, he's probably going to talk about the play calling. Maybe some of the decisions, maybe some of the performances, something like that we've had to discuss in the past because TCU laid an egg in this one. They certainly did. 41-28, and really that last touchdown was kind of a garbage time touchdown, just kind of making their top receiver and Eric McAllister kind of feel better because they kept showing a picture on the sideline, and you could tell that they were not happy whatsoever. He finished this one with 4 receptions for 156, including an 85-yard touchdown. The dude was an animal. He absolutely insane. And the fact that they only got 4 receptions out of him is a huge nod to Kansas State's defense and a huge question mark to why TCU didn't try to do that even more. They had 2 receivers over 100 yards with Ed Small also jumping in there, 6 receptions, 101. Pretty sure Ed Small's a freshman. So pretty interesting things on that as well. Yeah, he's a freshman from Austin, Texas. Small guy. So Ed Small, small guy, 6 foot, 205. And it's just overall, I really liked what I saw from this defense. The pressure was there. They played bend but don't break defense. It's not like they completely shut down Josh Hoover. And we mentioned 2 receivers over 100 yards. Josh Hoover threw for 376. He was 26 for 47. They definitely wanted to throw the football in this one. But Kansas State found a way to capitalize on the turnovers, something that they couldn't do last week against Baylor. And that's what stings the most. Because if you had that win against Baylor last week, and then you run in and have this win against TCU, you're staring at 3-1 in Big 12 play. And you're not talking about, oh, we're just staying alive. You're talking about after losses to Iowa State, to Colorado this week. You're talking about what Kansas looks like they're going to lose to Texas Tech as of this recording. You're looking at a potential just outside the driver's seat to get yourself to Arlington, with only Texas Tech standing in your way for the most part. Now, there's a couple other obstacles, but we're going to go through it this week during the bye week. We're going to probably commit an entire episode to it, at least one full segment this week during the show. There's a path. There is absolutely a path after getting this win. You had to get at least one of these wins between Baylor and TCU. You got this one against TCU heading into the bye week. And now there is absolutely a path. The puzzle pieces, the dominoes fell in your way so far this week, for the most part, in the Big 12 for Kansas State to continue their season. 3-4 doesn't look so dim right now. It obviously would feel a lot better if you were sitting 7-0, 6-1, and you most definitely could have been, but it still doesn't feel that dim, especially after this win against TCU. Really like what I saw here. It's only 72 yards rushing. They did allow 81 to Kavorian Barnes. He's a big steamroller kind of running back. But they did have some negative plays as well to move that back for 72 yards for 22 carries. Again, I think the defense did a great job. And when you when you conduct turnovers and you capitalize on turnovers, the yardage really doesn't matter. It doesn't, because you are scoring points on the defensive side. So if you want to find a way to let them score a couple big-time plays towards the end of the game when you're up by multiple scores, fine. And if you have that PTSD feeling after giving up a 14-point lead last week against Baylor, I completely understand. But this defense showed that, hey, we're going to get these turnovers. We might give up 156 yards to an Eric McAllister that we mentioned this week during the show, that if you throw a 50-50 ball to him, it's more like a 60-40. And he definitely burnt, I think, Zayshawn Rich on an 85-yard pass. I think the touchdown he had at the end of the game was to Zayshawn Rich as well. He took care of business. He absolutely did. But Kansas State comes on top, 41-28, and that's all that matters in this one. So what does that mean moving forward? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the show and, of course, during this week. But next, I want to talk about the offense, because that was the biggest narrative heading into this game. We knew no Dylan Edwards was going to be there yet again, but it didn't matter this time. And this time, maybe we can shut that narrative up for good. Let's talk about that next on the other side right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Big Sunday football happening this week. I like the Seahawks-Jaguars game, Monday Night Football. You got Commanders-Bears. You got Bills and Falcons. There's going to be some really good games going on in the NFL. And then I mentioned this last week when we did this ad read. The Kansas State Wildcats were a plus odds on FanDuel to get 6 wins. I don't know if that plus odds is going to be there anymore after this win against TCU. So if you got in, awesome. If not, there might still be a chance. So check that out on FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Joe Jackson is the name of the game when it comes to this one here, with Kansas State getting the victory 41-28, at least on the offensive side. There was a huge narrative heading into this game. Of course, myself included was discussing this, and it didn't help that national media attention talked about it as well. I called it a nightmare, a disaster of a PR mistake by both Chris Kleiman, Dylan Edwards, and his agent, Reggie Blackwell. It didn't matter. Dylan Edwards did not play in this game, and it didn't matter. And that's a good feeling to have if you're a Kansas State Wildcats fan. Because for the first time all season, for the first time, and you can say multiple years because you had DJ Giddens in the backfield, but for the first time all season, you won a football game where your running game was a big part of it. Dare I say, one of the biggest portions of it on the offensive side. Now, yes, you had a lot of help from the defense, got those turnovers, scoring chances, helped you out there for as well. But Joe Jackson, 27 carries for 110 yards. That's a career high. The first time in his collegiate career he's over 100 yards in rushing, with a 21-yard long, and absolutely love seeing it. It didn't matter that Dylan Edwards didn't play here. Joe Jackson stepped up when he had to last week against Baylor, only had 60-something yards. I mentioned I don't think 60 yards would be good enough to win this game against TCU. Maybe you heard it and said, okay, fine, let's double it and go to 110 on 27 carries, and that did the job. 45 carries for 145 yards for this Kansas State offense to win this game. And check this one out as well. Remember when Chris Kleiman said this week on Monday's press conference, if you go back all the way to Monday after the Baylor loss, and he said, Avery Johnson's the best quarterback for a reason, and we're not going to run him 15 times. We're not going to do that 15 times a game. Well, he was right. We did not run him 15 times a game. But you did run him 13 times. He got 29 yards, including a 12-yard rush. And if you remember that statistic, when he has more than 10 carries in a game, heading into this one against TCU, Kansas State is 7-3. Mark that now 8-3 with this win against TCU. So it proves exactly what we were screaming at. Continue to run Avery Johnson with the football, control the dynamic and the tempo of this game, make him become that dual threat quarterback that scares the secondary, scares people from containing on the outside, making second decisions, having to keep eyes in the backfield, and then it opens up everything else. Like throwing it to Jared Tibbs for 31 yards, throwing it for Garrett Oakley for 2 of his touchdowns, including one that went for 32. An absolute great game by Avery Johnson. Throws 3 touchdown passes in this one. Didn't kill it on the stat sheet when it comes to yards. Didn't break a career high in yards like he did last week against Baylor, but he didn't have to. He went 16 for 26, nothing crazy on the completion percentage side, but threw 3 touchdowns. When they had the football, especially in the second half, you can make all the conversations you want towards the first because there was definitely some concerns and things changed. At the end of this first quarter, as crazy as the score is, 41-28, we're talking almost 70 points here. It was 0-0 at the end of the first. So there was definitely some slow things that happened at the beginning of this game. But what matters is at the end, Avery Johnson and the offense took over when they had to. He became that game manager that they needed. And that's not a bad word. People like to say that's not a good phrase to use for a quarterback. I disagree. If that game manager, that field general type of definition you want to give a quarterback gives you a win, helps you control the clock, then that's an absolutely great term to use. And I think Avery Johnson did that in this one with the help from Joe Jackson and the offensive line and everybody else. There was a couple times where the offensive line broke down. John Pastore let up a really bad block that got Avery Johnson a sack. You don't really see Avery Johnson get sacked too often, so those usually pop out. But I'm interested to see what the advanced data looks like overall in this one on the offensive line, because I think they overall played good. That's just one that popped up in my head right now after watching the game and then coming to talk about it with you all right here. Devon Rice got 2 carries for 8 yards, and Montario Ellison Jr. got a carry as well. So they went deep in the running back depth with the missing of Dylan Edwards. It makes you wonder that if he does decide to, the rumors of him potentially redshirting, because that was the thing that popped up on the national media this past week where Pete Nakos of On 3 said that his agent, Dylan Edwards' agent, said that's not anything that's happening. They made basically a statement that popped up on social media that said they're looking forward to getting him healthy and get back on the field. But if that was the case, because he is at the 4-game mark, after watching what Joe Jackson has done last week and this week, and again, that's still not the same pinnacle of what Dylan Edwards has done when he's completely healthy, looking at the Rutgers game and the UCF game, but it shows that it is manageable to win football games with somebody like Joe Jackson in the backfield. At the beginning of the season, that wasn't the case. Whatever adjustments have happened with Matt Wells, with Coach Anderson, the running backs coach for Kansas State, whatever adjustments were made, and maybe it was made because they knew for a fact that Dylan Edwards was not playing in this game and they had to make changes and they had to make them fast, and maybe they're sick of the narrative. Whatever the case is, they stepped up, and I absolutely love it because when the Kansas State running game is working, they control the game. How many games this season have they been good in running and they won the game? Not one. Unless you want to count last week against Baylor, good. I think it was just good for the circumstances, but I don't put it in the good category. So overall, really like what the offense saw. Garrett Oakley stepped up 4 receptions for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns, as I mentioned. One was outside the red zone, too. Wasn't even in the red zone. A 32-yard touchdown pass. Look at that. Tight ends getting catches outside the red zone. We're evolving. I love it. Absolutely evolving. Gotta love what you're seeing from this Kansas State team over the past couple weeks. Really. And you include the Baylor game as well, because they're a couple plays away from winning that football game. And it just is a sour taste knowing that if you did win, you're looking at a 4-3 record and 3-2 in Big 12 play. But overall, since the first bye week, UCF, Baylor, Kansas, TCU, they're looking good. So now we hit another bye week. That's the joy of playing on week 0. That's the joy of getting multiple bye weeks. But this is where the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the schedule happens. And if Kansas State's going to make any noise and continue to play the Bee Gees in the background, staying alive, well, they got to have a tough task next time up. And the streak is on the line. Let's talk about that next and wrap up this show right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State, with Kansas State beating TCU. Well, first, this one's brought to you by Gametime. College football is back. Couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like it. But let's be real, actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself, especially at Bill Snyder Family Stadium when you're going 57,000 large inside the stadium. Another great attendance over in Manhattan. But with those endless queues, hidden fees, prices, and jumping at checkout, you just want to find a way to get in your seat. That's why I use Gametime. It's the app that gives advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege, that's all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. So with the win against TCU, what does that mean for Kansas State the rest of the season? I mean, that's the real big question that's going to be floating across our mind for not just today or tomorrow, but the entire week, because there's a whole bye week for us to bask in the glory of this win. And that's a great feeling to have for the first time heading into a bye week. You're heading in with a win. Remember, the first bye week happened after the dreadful loss to Arizona, the last non-conference game of the season, easily the worst game of Avery Johnson's career. And then you hit a bye week, the entire talks of an identity shift, the entire talks of culture reset and just finding energy. And they did that. So they had a successful bye week. And then you play the games against UCF, Baylor, TCU. You're 1-2 plays away from going 3-0 in there. Instead, you're 2-1. And you're back to 500 in Big 12 play. You have those 2 losses in Big 12 play. That's absolutely huge. There's no doubt about that, because remember last season, the 2 teams that made it to Arlington went 7-2, and that was the best way to get to Arlington. The only way was go 7-2 with a couple tiebreakers. So some things came and fell your way so far this week. There are still games playing as we're speaking right now, and we can discuss this more later on in the week. But Iowa State loses the game. Now, of course, they have the tiebreaker over you. However, but they also picked up their second loss in Big 12 play. You gave TCU their second loss, and you have the tiebreaker over them. UCF lost, so I think they moved down even farther. And it looks like Kansas is going to lose to Texas Tech. Speaking of Kansas, that's what's next. Not only ensuring you do not get your 3rd loss of the season, but also making sure you keep the streak alive in Lawrence, a game that has been so close over the last couple of years. And now we have 2 weeks to think about one of the biggest rivalries in college football, the Sunflower Showdown. And yes, it doesn't feel like a rivalry when they can't find a way to beat Kansas State, but let's keep it real. There's been games this year where you look back and then after the game, you're like, I don't know if this team could beat Kansas. The way they're playing right now, however, after playing UCF, Baylor, and TCU, I don't think anyone can beat Kansas State if they keep this up. I think if they continue to play the same way they played right now, and they weren't perfect by any means, but if they played the same energy, if they got the same type of performance from the defense, a Kansas State defense that we're used to seeing, if they got that against a Texas Tech on November 1st, I think they can run with Texas Tech. Absolutely do. I think they can take care of Kansas and Lawrence if they play the way they played against TCU. They'll take care of Oklahoma State regardless. I think they take care of Utah and Salt Lake City. And although Colorado just beat Iowa State, Kansas State can beat Colorado if they play the way they played against TCU. There are 5 games left on the schedule, folks. 5. And there is no doubt in my mind, after watching them play against TCU, that if they play, and this is the if part, if they play the same way they did against TCU, this team could go 8-4. This team could beat Kansas. They could beat Texas Tech. They could beat Oklahoma State. They could win in Utah. And they could finish the season with a win against the Colorado Buffaloes. Now, would 8-4 get you to the Big 12 championship? I think you'd have to have a couple things go in your favor, but that's the best you can do. You can't get any better than that right now. You can meet the same standard as last year. Last year didn't get you to Arlington, so who knows if that does it again. But last year you didn't go 7-2 in conference with that 8-4 record. You had way more losses in conference. So if you can go 7-2 in conference and finish the season 8-4, it might look like you're meeting the same standard compared to overall record-wise than last year. But on the flip side, you're doing much better inside one of the toughest conferences in college football. Dog eat dog, especially when you're talking about trying to continue the streak and then playing a team that is going to once again be a top 10 team and probably will be a top 10 team in the country in Texas Tech when you play them on November 1st. If you can get through the next 2 games, and that's how we looked at it this week, last 2 weeks we did with Baylor and TCU, and we all know that the Baylor game was just a few plays away from winning that one. So if you can get through the next 2 weeks, past the bye, Kansas and Texas Tech, I think you have a really good shot at running the table and winning out. And who knows, maybe 8-4 with a 7-2 record is good enough. Maybe the tiebreakers fall in your favor, especially if they get a win against Texas Tech and a win against Utah. Who knows? Still a long stretch. Don't get me wrong. It's still a long shot. I'm not banking on it. I'm not banking on them going to Arlington, but I do think there's a good shot at going 8-4 here. 7-5 at the absolute worst if they play the same way they get against TCU. And that's a good feeling to have. I didn't think I'd be in this spot right now. After the way this season started, and I don't mean the way season started, because the game against Iowa State, I always said that was going to be a coin flip. I always did. And the Dylan Edwards injury, say what you will about that. But the losses to Army, Arizona, those are the 2 ones where I'm like, the way the season started. Those are the 2 I'm always referring to when I say that from now on. I'm not talking about the Iowa State game. That loss doesn't bug me. It doesn't. That's out of all the losses, that's the one that bugs me the absolute least, is the one in Dublin in a monsoon with no Dylan Edwards against an Iowa State team who was just in the Big 12 championship the year before. The loss against Army stings. The loss against Arizona absolutely stings. They're both non-conference. And, of course, that loss against Baylor is bad as well. Although the Iowa State game is a conference game, it still doesn't bug me. Maybe I'm wrong, but it still doesn't do it for me. All right, tomorrow we'll have an episode out talking about the post-game presser with Chris Kleiman and players. And then we're going to head into the bye week. We got a lot to talk about heading into the game in Lawrence, October 25th. So we got a couple weeks to discuss that one. And then we're going to get into some basketball coverage because we're a few weeks away from the basketball season starting. We're going to break down some players on both the men's and women's side and make sure you are the fully educated fan on both men's and women's basketball heading into the season. Sweet 16 run for the women's last year. The men's team, can they get back to the tourney? I like their chances. We're going to discuss that this week on Locked On Kansas State. But until then, please like the video, please subscribe, and we'll see you back here next time, right here on Locked On Kansas State.